Right now, somewhere in your day, your mind is doing 10 things at once and finishing none of them well. You start a task and check your phone before you even get going. You sit down to rest and your thoughts are still running through everything you didn't finish. You go to bed tired, but your head won't stop talking. This isn't a small problem. It's the reason so many days feel busy but empty, full but unsatisfying. There's a reason monks can sit still for hours, while most of us can't sit still for 5 minutes. It's not something they were born with. It's something they built, one small habit at a time, and every single one of those habits is something you can start using today. In the next hour, you're going to learn exactly how they did it, and exactly how you can do it too. Stay with me. Your focus is closer than you think. Chapter 1. Discover the hidden focus habits monks practice every single day. There is a monastery in the mountains where a young monk once asked his teacher a question that seems simple but is not. He asked, "How do you stay focused for so many hours when I cannot focus for even 10 minutes?" The old teacher did not answer with words. He picked up a bowl of water and asked the young monk to carry it across the courtyard without spilling a single drop. The young monk walked slowly, his eyes locked on the water, his breath steady, his mind empty of everything except the task in front of him. When he reached the other side, the bowl was full. The teacher smiled and said, "That is focus. You already have it. You just forgot how to use it." This story is not about mysticism. It is about a skill that every human being is born with and that modern life slowly strips away. Monks did not discover some secret power that regular people do not have access to. They discovered something far more practical. They discovered habits, small, repeatable, unglamorous habits that train the mind the same way lifting weights trains the body. And the truth is, you already know how to focus. You have done it before. Think about a time when you were so absorbed in something that you lost track of time completely. Maybe it was a conversation with someone you love. Maybe it was a project you cared about. Maybe it was a moment of pure stillness watching the sun go down. In that moment, your mind was not scattered across 100 different worries. It was fully present in one place. That is focus. That is the state monks train themselves to enter on command, not by accident. The difference between you and a monk is not talent, it is not intelligence. It is not even discipline in the way most people imagine discipline, as some kind of harsh punishment you inflict on yourself. The difference is repetition. Monks do the same small things every single day until those things become automatic. They do not rely on motivation because motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes like weather. Instead, they rely on structure. They build a life where focus is not something they have to fight for every morning. It is something that happens naturally because the environment and the habits are already pointing them in that direction. Let me walk you through what these hidden habits actually look like, because once you see them clearly, you will realize they are not out of reach. They are available to you starting today. The first hidden habit is single tasking. This sounds almost too simple to matter, but it is the foundation of everything else. Monks do one thing at a time. When they eat, they eat. When they walk, they walk. When they clean, they clean. There is no phone buzzing in their pocket while they eat lunch. There is no half-formed thought about tomorrow's schedule while they sweep the floor. Every action gets their complete attention because they have trained themselves to believe that whatever they are doing right now is the most important thing in the world, even if it is something as small as washing a dish. Compare this to how most people live. We eat while scrolling through our phones. We have conversations while thinking about work emails. We drive while planning arguments we might have later. Our minds are constantly split into fragments, and every fragment steals a little bit of our mental energy. By the end of the day, we feel exhausted, not because we did so much, but because we did everything halfway, with a divided mind, and a divided mind burns far more energy than a focused one. Here is how you bring this into your own life immediately. Pick one activity today, just one, and do it with full attention. It can be brushing your teeth, it can be making your coffee, it can be listening to a friend speak. During that activity, do not let your mind wander to anything else. If it wanders, and it will, gently bring it back to the task at hand. This is not about being perfect, it is about practicing the return. Every time you notice your mind has drifted and you bring it back, you are strengthening the same mental muscle that monks strengthen through years of practice. You do not need years, you need consistency. The second hidden habit is silence as a daily practice, not an occasional luxury. Monks build silence into their day the way most people build meals into their day. It is not optional, it is scheduled. This does not mean you need to sit in a dark room for hours. It means you protect small pockets of time, where there is no noise, no input, no stimulation, no music, no podcast, no conversation, no screen, just you and your own breathing. Most people avoid silence because it feels uncomfortable at first. When the noise stops, all the thoughts we have been avoiding start to surface. This is exactly why silence is so powerful. It forces you to face what is actually going on inside your mind, instead of drowning it out with constant input. Monks are not avoiding discomfort. They are training themselves to sit with it calmly until it passes, because they know that thoughts and feelings, like waves, always rise and always fall. Nothing stays at its peak forever, not even anxiety, not even sadness, not even restlessness. Bring this into your life by starting with 5 minutes. Sit somewhere quiet, close your eyes if that feels comfortable, and simply breathe. Do not try to stop your thoughts. Let them come and go like clouds passing across the sky. Your only job is to notice when you have gotten lost in a thought and gently return your attention to your breath. 5 minutes will feel long at first. That discomfort is not a sign you are doing it wrong. It is a sign you are doing it right, because it means you are noticing how loud and busy your mind actually is, probably for the first time in a long while. The third hidden habit is doing hard things on purpose, every single day, in small doses. Monks do not wait for hardship to find them. They seek out small discomforts deliberately, whether it is waking before sunrise, eating simply, or standing in cold water. This is not about suffering for the sake of suffering. It is about building a relationship with discomfort so that when real difficulty arrives, and it always does, you are not shocked by it. You have already trained your mind to stay calm and focused, even when things are not easy or pleasant. Most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid discomfort. They take the easiest option every time, and slowly, their tolerance for anything difficult shrinks. Then when a real challenge appears, a job loss, a health scare, a broken relationship, they feel completely overwhelmed because they have never practiced staying steady under pressure. You can start small. Take a cold shower for the last 30 seconds. Wake up 15 minutes earlier than you need to. Sit with a craving, whether it is for sugar, for your phone, for distraction, and simply notice the urge without acting on it immediately. These small acts are not about punishment. They are about proving to yourself, in small ways every day, that you are stronger than your impulses. Every time you choose the harder path on purpose, you are building the same inner strength that allows monks to sit in meditation for hours without flinching. The fourth hidden habit is simplifying the environment so the mind has less to fight against. Monks live with very few possessions, Not because owning things is wrong, but because clutter in your surroundings creates clutter in your mind. Every object you own, every notification on your phone, every open tab on your browser is quietly asking for a piece of your attention. When your space is full of things, your mind has to work harder just to filter out what does not matter. And that filtering process is exhausting even when you do not notice it happening. You do not need to give away all your belongings to benefit from this principle. Start with one drawer, one desk, one corner of a room. Remove what you do not use, what you do not need, what only exists because you forgot to make a decision about it. As your physical space becomes clearer, you will notice your mind becoming clearer too, because there is less visual and mental noise pulling at your attention throughout the day. The fifth hidden habit, and perhaps the most important one, is beginning each day with intention instead of reaction. Most people wake up and immediately reach for their phone. Within the first few minutes of being conscious, their mind is already flooded with other people's opinions, other people's emergencies, other people's demands. By the time they get out of bed, their entire day has been hijacked before they even had a chance to decide what they wanted from it. Monks do the opposite. Before they engage with the outside world, they engage with themselves first. This might be through prayer, through reflection, through simply sitting quietly and deciding what matters most for the hours ahead. This single shift, choosing your own thoughts before the world chooses them for you, changes everything about how the rest of the day unfolds. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone, give yourself just 2 minutes. Ask yourself what you want this day to feel like. Ask yourself what one thing, if you accomplished nothing else, would make today worthwhile. You do not need a complicated ritual. You need 2 honest minutes with yourself before the noise of the world rushes in. None of these 5 habits require a mountain retreat. None of them require years of training before you see results. What they require is willingness, the willingness to practice something small and unglamorous every single day, even when you do not feel like it, even when you do not see immediate results, even when your mind resists. Focus is not a personality trait that some people have and others do not. It is a skill, built the same way any skill is built, through repetition over time. The monk carrying the bowl of water was not born with perfect focus. He built it, one careful step at a time, day after day, until walking with full attention became as natural as breathing. You are capable of the same transformation. It does not start with some dramatic change to your entire life. It starts with one meal eaten without distraction, one 5-minute sit in silence, one small discomfort chosen on purpose, one cluttered drawer emptied, one quiet morning before the noise begins. Small, honest steps, repeated daily, are the real secret behind every focused mind you have ever admired. There is no hidden trick beyond this. There is only the willingness to begin, and to begin again tomorrow, and the day after that, until these small acts become who you are. Chapter 2. Silence your mental noise and reclaim your true attention. There is a sound that never stops playing in most people's minds. It is not music. It is not conversation. It is a constant stream of half-formed thoughts, worries about tomorrow, replays of yesterday, arguments that never happened, plans that never get finished. This sound is so familiar that most people forget it is even there. They think it is just what thinking feels like, but it is not thinking. It is noise, and noise is different from thought, the same way static is different from a clear radio signal. Real thinking is sharp and purposeful. Noise is scattered and endless, and it drains energy without ever producing anything useful. A monk sitting in meditation is not someone whose mind has gone blank. His mind still produces thoughts, the same way anyone's does. The difference is that he has learned to notice the noise without being pulled into it. He watches a thought appear the way someone might watch a bird land on a branch, briefly present, then gone, without chasing it, without feeding it, without letting it build into a storm. This is the skill hiding underneath everything else a monk practices. Before he can focus on anything meaningful, he first has to quiet the noise that competes for his attention every single moment. And this is not a gift some people are born with, while others are not. It is trained, the same way a muscle is trained, through repetition, patience, and a willingness to feel uncomfortable before things get easier. Most people never learn this skill because they never stop long enough to notice how loud their own mind actually is. Life moves fast, and every gap in the day gets filled immediately. Waiting in line becomes scrolling through a phone. A quiet drive becomes a podcast or a phone call. Even the last few minutes before sleep get filled with videos or messages. There is no space left where the mind can simply be still, and because there is no space, the noise never gets addressed. It just keeps building, quietly, in the background, until it starts leaking into everything else. Concentration becomes harder, sleep becomes lighter, patience becomes shorter, and most people blame stress, or busyness, or lack of willpower, when the real cause is much simpler. Their mind has never been given a chance to settle. Reclaiming attention starts with understanding where it actually goes. Attention is not lost all at once. It leaks out in small amounts, constantly, through habits so automatic they barely register as choices anymore. Checking a phone during a conversation, thinking about a task while doing another task, replaying an old argument while trying to fall asleep. Each of these moments feels small and harmless on its own, but added together across a single day, they represent hours of mental energy spent on things that produce nothing. The mind was never designed to run in 50 directions at once. It was designed to move through one thing at a time, fully, and then release it before moving to the next. When this natural rhythm gets broken, the result is a constant low-level fatigue that never fully goes away, no matter how much rest a person gets. The first step toward silencing this noise is learning to notice it without judgment. Most people, the moment they sit quietly for even a minute, become frustrated with how busy their mind is. They think something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong. A busy mind is simply what happens when a mind has never been trained to slow down. Judging it only adds another layer of noise on top of the noise that was already there. Instead, the goal is simple observation. Sit somewhere quiet. Close the eyes if that feels natural. Breathe normally, without forcing it, and then just watch. Thoughts will come. Let them come. Do not push them away. And do not follow them either. Picture each thought as a car passing on a distant road. It is there, it is visible, and then it moves on. The mind's job in this moment is not to stop the traffic. It is simply to sit on the side of the road and watch it pass without stepping into it. This practice feels strange at first because it goes against everything modern life has trained people to do. Everything around us encourages engagement. Every notification, every headline, every conversation invites a reaction. Sitting quietly and choosing not to react to a thought feels almost unnatural in a world built entirely around constant response. But this is exactly the muscle that needs building. The ability to notice a thought and let it pass without immediately acting on it is the same ability that allows someone to stay calm during an argument, to make a clear decision under pressure, or to sleep peacefully instead of lying awake replaying the day. It is not a small skill. It touches nearly every part of life, even though the practice itself looks like almost nothing from the outside. Start with 3 minutes. Not 30, not even 10. 3 minutes of sitting quietly, watching thoughts rise and fall, gently returning attention to the breath whenever the mind wanders off, which it will, again and again. This is not failure. This is the entire practice. The moment of noticing a wandering mind and choosing to return is where the real training happens. It is not about achieving a perfectly silent mind on the first try, or even the 100th try. It is about strengthening the return, the same way lifting a weight strengthens a muscle through repeated effort, not through one perfect lift. Beyond formal sitting practice, silence needs to be reclaimed throughout the rest of the day as well. This means creating small gaps where no input is allowed in. The walk to the car without a phone in hand, the first 10 minutes after waking up without checking messages, a meal eaten without any screen in view. These moments feel small, almost pointless, but they serve an important purpose. They remind the mind what it feels like to simply exist without being fed constant stimulation. Without these gaps, the mind never gets a break, and a mind that never rests eventually starts to feel exhausted in a way that regular sleep cannot fix, because the exhaustion is not physical. It is the exhaustion of a mind that has forgotten how to be still. Another important part of reclaiming attention is learning to finish thoughts instead of abandoning them halfway. Much of the mental noise people carry comes from unfinished business, decisions left hanging, conversations left unresolved, worries turned over again and again without ever being fully examined. When a difficult thought arises, instead of pushing it away or getting lost in it, it helps to give it a few minutes of honest, direct attention. Ask what exactly is causing the worry. Ask what, if anything, can actually be done about it right now. If nothing can be done in this moment, acknowledge that clearly and then set it aside on purpose, rather than letting it simply drift in the background all day, unresolved and quietly draining energy. This is very different from ignoring a problem. It is closing the loop on a thought so it stops looping endlessly without resolution. Physical stillness also plays a role in mental stillness more than most people realize. A body that is constantly moving, constantly fidgeting, constantly reaching for something to do, sends a signal to the mind that stillness is uncomfortable and should be avoided. Practicing physical stillness, even for short periods, teaches the nervous system that it is safe to slow down. Sitting with a straight back, hands resting quietly, feet still, for even a few minutes, begins to train the entire system, body and mind together, toward calm. This is part of why monks pay so much attention to posture during meditation. It is not about looking a certain way, it is about using the body as a tool to help settle the mind. Silence, over time, changes the relationship a person has with their own thoughts. Instead of feeling controlled by every worry or urge that arises, there begins to be a small gap between the thought and the reaction to it. In that gap lies real freedom. A thought like, "I am not good enough," can arise, and instead of immediately believing it and spiraling into it, there is now a moment of space to notice it, question it, and choose whether it deserves attention or not. This gap does not appear overnight. It builds slowly, through daily practice, the same 3 minutes of sitting quietly, the same small gaps of no input throughout the day, repeated consistently, until they start to reshape how the mind naturally responds to stress. This is the deeper reason silence matters so much. It is not about relaxation for its own sake. It is about attention, the most valuable resource a person has, being reclaimed from the 1,000 small places it usually leaks away to. Every minute spent lost in noise is a minute unavailable for the things that actually matter. Real connection with the people in front of you, meaningful work, honest reflection, genuine rest. A mind clouded by constant noise cannot give full attention to any of these things, no matter how much someone wants to. But a mind that has practiced sitting quietly, even briefly, even imperfectly, starts to develop the capacity to be fully present when it matters most. Begin today, not tomorrow, not when things calm down, not when there is more time. Find 3 minutes, sit quietly, breathe, watch the thoughts come and go without chasing them. When the mind wanders, and it will, gently bring it back. This small, unremarkable act, repeated daily, is where every monk's calm mind actually began, not as some rare gift, but as a simple choice, made again and again, to sit with the noise instead of running from it, until the noise slowly began to quiet on its own. Chapter 3. Build one morning ritual that transforms your entire day instantly. The first few minutes after waking up decide more about a day than almost any other moment. Not because of anything magical about the morning itself, but because those minutes set the direction everything else follows. A mind that wakes up and immediately reaches for a phone starts the day already reacting to other people's messages, other people's news, other people's demands. A mind that wakes up and spends even a few minutes in stillness, choosing its own thoughts before the world offers its own, starts the day already in charge of itself. This difference sounds small on paper. In practice, it changes almost everything about how the following hours unfold. Monks understand this better than almost anyone, which is why their mornings are never left to chance. There is no scrolling, no rushing, no checking messages before the feet even touch the floor. Every part of the early morning is intentional, not because rules demand it, but because they have learned through years of practice that how a mind begins its day determines how steady it stays for the rest of it. A mind that starts scattered tends to stay scattered. A mind that starts calm has a much better chance of staying calm, even when the day brings difficulty. Building a morning ritual is not about waking up at some impossible hour or performing a long, complicated routine that requires hours of free time most people do not have. It is about choosing a small number of actions, done in the same order, every single day, that train the mind to enter a focused, grounded state before anything else has the chance to pull it in a different direction. The power is not in any single action. The power is in the repetition and in the fact that these actions happen before the noise of the outside world gets a chance to speak first. The first piece of a strong morning ritual is delaying contact with outside information. This means no phone, no messages, no news, no social feeds, for at least the first several minutes after waking, ideally longer. This single choice protects the mind during its most vulnerable window. Right after sleep, before full alertness has returned, the mind is unusually open to whatever it encounters first. Feed it stress, urgency, or other people's problems in that window, and it carries that tone forward into the rest of the morning. Feed it stillness instead, and it carries that steadiness forward as well. This is not a small detail. It is the foundation everything else gets built on. The second piece is movement, even brief movement, done deliberately rather than rushed. This does not require a long workout or special equipment. It can be as simple as stretching for a few minutes, walking outside, or doing a short set of physical movements that wake the body gently rather than jolting it awake with stress and rush. The purpose here is not fitness, it is connection, reminding the body that it is present and awake before demands get placed on the mind. A body that has been acknowledged and moved, even briefly, tends to carry less tension throughout the day than a body that goes straight from lying still to sitting at a desk under pressure. The third piece is a few minutes of quiet reflection or breathing, similar to the practice of sitting with a settled mind, but shorter, simpler, meant purely to anchor the morning rather than serve as a full meditation session. This can be as short as 2 or 3 minutes. Sit somewhere quiet. Breathe slowly. Notice the body, the breath, the sounds nearby. There is no need to force any particular feeling. The purpose is simply to arrive fully in the present moment before stepping into the demands of the day, rather than rushing straight from sleep into obligation without ever truly waking up mentally. The fourth piece is setting a clear intention for the day, something far more specific than a vague hope for things to go well. This might be a single question asked honestly each morning. What matters most today? What would make today feel worthwhile, even if nothing else got accomplished? Writing this down, even in a single sentence, makes it far more powerful than simply thinking it. A written intention becomes something the mind can return to throughout the day whenever distraction pulls attention elsewhere. A kind of anchor point that keeps the day oriented around what actually matters rather than whatever demands happen to be loudest. These 4 pieces, protected time before outside input, brief movement, quiet stillness, and a clear intention, form the skeleton of a ritual that can be completed in 15 to 20 minutes for most people, sometimes less. The specific order can shift slightly depending on personal preference, but the core principle stays the same. Handle the inner world first, let the outer world wait its turn. What makes this approach so powerful is not any single component. It is the compounding effect of doing the same grounding actions every single day until they stop requiring willpower and simply become how mornings work. The first few days will feel effortful. The mind will want to reach for the phone out of pure habit. The body will resist the stillness because sitting quietly feels unfamiliar and slightly uncomfortable at first. This resistance is completely normal and does not mean the ritual is failing. It means old patterns are being replaced with new ones, and replacement always feels awkward before it feels natural. Somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd week, something shifts. The ritual stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like the way the day is simply supposed to begin. Missing it starts to feel noticeably off, the same way skipping a meal feels off to someone used to eating regularly. This is the point where the ritual has moved from being a practice into being an identity, and identity is far more powerful than willpower because it no longer requires convincing. It just requires continuing. The effects of this kind of morning ritual extend far beyond the morning itself. A mind that begins the day calm and grounded tends to respond to unexpected stress with more patience than a mind that started the day already reactive and rushed. A difficult email feels less overwhelming. An unexpected problem at work feels more manageable. A conversation that might have triggered irritation on a chaotic morning gets handled with more composure on a grounded one. None of this happens because the external circumstances changed. It happens because the starting state of the mind changed, and that starting state colors everything that follows, the same way the bass note of a song shapes how every other note that follows is heard. There is also a quieter benefit that builds slowly over time, one that has less to do with any single day and more to do with the overall trajectory of a life. A person who protects their mornings, even briefly, even imperfectly, sends themselves a daily message that their own mind matters enough to be tended to before the demands of everyone else take over. This message, repeated daily, builds a kind of quiet self-respect that shows up in far more areas of life than just mornings. It shows up in how boundaries get set at work, how conversations get handled at home, how decisions get made under pressure. A person who consistently gives themselves even 15 honest minutes each morning is practicing, in a small way, the exact same discipline that eventually shows up as strength in much larger moments. It helps to start small, rather than attempting an elaborate ritual on the first day. Trying to add too many new habits at once usually leads to giving up entirely within a week. Choose one piece first, most often the simple act of delaying phone use for the first 10 minutes after waking. Practice that alone for several days until it feels natural. Then add brief movement. Then add a few minutes of quiet breathing. Then add the written intention. Building the ritual piece by piece, rather than all at once, makes it far more likely to stick permanently, rather than becoming another abandoned attempt at self-improvement that fades out after a few enthusiastic days. There will be mornings where the ritual gets skipped entirely, whether from oversleeping, from an early obligation, from simple forgetfulness. This does not undo the practice or mean starting over from zero. A missed morning is simply a missed morning. The very next day offers another chance to begin again, and this willingness to return without guilt or self-criticism is itself part of the practice. The same return that gets trained during quiet sitting, applied now to the ritual as a whole, rather than just to a single wandering thought. A single ritual, repeated with enough consistency, has the power to shift not just individual days but the entire pattern of a life over months and years. This is not because the ritual itself contains any special magic. It is because the mind that begins each day grounded, intentional, and calm tends to make slightly better decisions, hold slightly more patience, and carry slightly more clarity through everything that follows. And these small differences, compounded daily over time, eventually become the difference between a life that feels reactive and scattered, and one that feels steady and self-directed. It begins tomorrow morning with 15 quiet minutes, chosen deliberately before the rest of the world gets the chance to choose for you. Chapter 4. Break free from distractions, stealing your time and energy. A single hour of a person's day can disappear without a single meaningful thing happening in it, and most people never even notice it slipping away. A quick check of a phone turns into 15 minutes. A short break turns into scrolling through updates that mean nothing an hour later. A task that should take 20 minutes stretches into an hour because attention keeps sliding somewhere else and having to be pulled back, over and over, each pull costing a little more focus than the last. None of these moments feel dramatic while they happen. That is exactly what makes them so dangerous. Distraction rarely announces itself. It simply arrives quietly, takes what it wants, and leaves before anyone notices what was lost. Energy works the same way attention does, and the two are far more connected than most people realize. Every time focus gets interrupted and then has to restart, it costs mental energy, not just time. This is why a day filled with constant small interruptions can leave someone feeling completely drained, even though very little actual work got done. The exhaustion is not coming from effort. It is coming from the constant switching, the mental cost of starting, stopping, and starting again dozens of times throughout a single day. A mind that stays on one task for an extended stretch uses far less energy than one that gets pulled in 10 directions, even if the total time spent working looks similar on paper. Monks understand this cost deeply, which is why their lives are structured to remove as many sources of unnecessary interruption as possible. This is not because they lack the willpower to resist distraction the way anyone else might. It is because they know willpower is a limited resource, and relying on willpower to resist distraction all day, every day, is a losing strategy in the long run. Instead, they shape their environment so that fewer distractions exist in the first place. which means less willpower gets spent resisting temptation and more energy stays available for what actually matters. This is the first major shift needed to break free from distraction. Stop treating it as purely a willpower problem. A person does not fail at focus because they are weak. They fail because they are constantly placing themselves in environments full of triggers designed, often quite deliberately, to pull attention away. Phones, notifications, open browser tabs, cluttered workspaces, all of these are built or arranged in ways that make distraction the path of least resistance. Fighting this with willpower alone is like trying to stay dry while standing under a running faucet. The better solution is not more willpower. It is turning off the faucet in the first place. Removing distraction starts with an honest look at where time actually goes, not where a person assumes it goes. Most people believe their day is filled with meaningful work, interrupted occasionally by distraction. In reality, for many, the ratio is closer to the opposite. Large blocks of scattered, low-value activity, interrupted occasionally by short bursts of real focus. This gap between perception and reality is important to see clearly, because it is impossible to fix a problem that has not been honestly acknowledged. For a few days, simply notice, without judgment, where attention actually goes throughout the day. Notice how often a phone gets picked up without any real reason. Notice how often one task gets abandoned halfway to check something else. This noticing alone, done honestly, often creates enough discomfort to spark real change. Once the pattern becomes visible, the next step is removing the easiest points of entry for distraction. This means physically separating from devices during periods meant for focused work, not simply promising to ignore them while they sit within reach. A phone sitting silently on a desk, even face down, even on silent, still pulls at attention because its presence alone creates the possibility of checking it. Out of sight changes this dramatically. Placing a phone in another room, in a drawer, anywhere outside of easy physical reach, removes the temptation almost entirely, because a temptation that requires real effort to access loses most of its pull. The same principle applies to digital spaces beyond just phones. A browser filled with multiple open tabs creates constant low-level noise, each tab a tiny reminder of something else that could be checked instead of the task at hand. Closing everything except what is directly needed for the current task removes this noise immediately. Notifications, whether from messages, social platforms, or email, should be turned off entirely during focused periods rather than simply ignored, because a notification that appears on screen has already stolen a portion of attention the moment it appears, whether or not it gets clicked. Beyond removing digital distraction, physical space matters as well. A cluttered desk, a messy room, piles of unfinished tasks visible in the background, all of these create a quiet, constant pull on attention, even when they are not being actively thought about. The mind registers unfinished business, even when it is not consciously focused on it, and this creates a low-level drain that makes deep focus harder to reach. Taking a few minutes to clear a workspace before beginning a task is not wasted time. It is preparation that pays for itself many times over in the quality of focus that follows. Time itself needs structure as well, not just space. Working without any defined start or end point makes it far easier for attention to drift, because there is no clear boundary signaling when full focus is actually required. Setting a specific block of time, even something as simple as 45 minutes, dedicated entirely to one task, creates a container that the mind can commit to more fully than an open-ended stretch of vague work time. Knowing there is a defined endpoint, followed by a real break, makes it easier to resist the pull of distraction during the working period itself, because the mind trusts that rest is coming soon, rather than feeling like it needs to escape the discomfort of focus immediately. Breaks themselves matter just as much as the focused periods they follow. A break spent scrolling through a phone is not actually a break at all. It simply trades one form of mental activity for another, often one that is even more scattered and draining than the work it was meant to provide relief from. A real break involves stepping away from screens entirely, even briefly, whether through a short walk, some stretching, or simply sitting quietly and looking away from any device. This kind of break actually restores mental energy, while a scrolling break often leaves someone feeling just as tired, sometimes more tired, than before the break began. Another important piece of breaking free from distraction involves reducing the number of decisions that need to be made throughout the day. Every small decision, even something as minor as choosing what to check next or which task to start first, uses a small amount of mental energy. When this energy gets spent on dozens of tiny, unnecessary decisions throughout the day, less remains available for the decisions that actually matter. Planning the next day's priorities the night before, rather than figuring them out in the moment, removes a significant source of this decision fatigue. Waking up already knowing the first task of the day removes an entire layer of potential distraction, because there is no gap of uncertainty where attention might wander toward something easier instead. It also helps to notice the emotional pull behind most distractions, rather than treating them as purely external triggers. Many people reach for distraction not because a notification demanded it, but because the task in front of them created some discomfort, boredom, difficulty, uncertainty, and distraction offered an easy escape from that discomfort. Recognizing this pattern changes the relationship with distraction significantly. Instead of blaming the phone or the notification, it becomes possible to notice the moment of discomfort itself and choose to sit with it briefly rather than immediately escaping into something easier. This single shift, staying present through a moment of boredom or difficulty rather than automatically reaching for relief, builds real mental strength over time, the same way physical strength builds through resisting the urge to put down a heavy weight before the set is finished. Breaking free from distraction is rarely about eliminating it completely and permanently on the first attempt. It is about steadily reducing its power, session by session, day by day, until periods of real focus become longer and easier to sustain than they used to be. Some days will still slip away into scattered attention, despite every good intention. This does not erase the progress made on other days. It simply means tomorrow offers another chance to remove one more distraction, protect one more block of time, and reclaim a little more energy that would otherwise have quietly disappeared without anyone noticing. The reward for this effort extends far beyond simple productivity. Time and energy reclaimed from distraction do not just go toward getting more tasks done, they go toward the things that actually matter most: real conversations without a phone pulling attention away, creative work done with full presence instead of scattered effort, rest that actually feels restful because the mind is not still buzzing from constant switching throughout the day. This is the real cost of distraction, not simply lost minutes on a clock, but lost presence in the moments and relationships that make up an actual life. Reclaiming that presence starts with a single choice, made today, to remove one distraction, protect one block of time, and notice, perhaps for the first time in a long while, what real focus actually feels like. Chapter 5. Train your mind like a warrior, facing daily challenges bravely. A soldier does not become brave the moment battle begins. Bravery gets built long before that. In quiet hours of training nobody watches, through drills repeated so many times that the body knows what to do, even when fear tries to take over the mind. This is the part most people miss when they think about courage. It looks sudden from the outside, a single moment where someone stands strong under pressure, but it was never sudden at all. It was prepared, piece by piece, session after session, until the moment of real pressure simply revealed what had already been built. The same is true for the kind of mental strength monks carry through their daily lives. It does not appear out of nowhere during a crisis. It gets built during ordinary days, through small, repeated choices to face discomfort instead of avoiding it. A warrior training for battle does not wait for the fight to start practicing. A monk training the mind does not wait for hardship to start building resilience. Both understand the same truth. Strength gets forged before it gets tested, never during the test itself. Most people live with a mind that has never been trained this way. It has been protected instead, shielded from discomfort at almost every turn, given exactly what it wants the moment it wants it. Hungry, eat immediately. Bored, reach for a phone immediately. Tired, stop immediately. Nothing wrong with rest or comfort on their own, but a mind that has never learned to sit with even small amounts of difficulty becomes fragile in ways that only reveal themselves when real difficulty finally arrives, usually at the worst possible moment, unannounced and unwelcome. Training the mind like a warrior means reversing this pattern deliberately, on purpose, starting with challenges small enough to handle, but real enough to matter. This is not about becoming harsh or cruel toward yourself. It is about building a relationship with discomfort, where it no longer holds so much power, where facing something difficult feels familiar instead of terrifying, because it has been practiced many times before in situations far smaller than the ones that truly count. The first principle of this training is choosing difficulty voluntarily rather than only facing it when forced. A person who only ever encounters challenge when life forces it upon them stays weak in the exact moments strength matters most, because their first real experience with hardship happens during the worst possible circumstances, with the highest possible stakes. A person who seeks out small, voluntary hardship regularly builds a different relationship with difficulty entirely. They have already practiced staying calm under pressure, many times in situations that carried far less risk. When the larger test arrives, it does not feel completely foreign. It feels like a harder version of something already familiar. This voluntary hardship does not need to be extreme to matter. Waking up before the alarm demands it, finishing a hard task before allowing any rest, sitting with a craving instead of satisfying it immediately, speaking up in a moment where staying silent would be easier. Each of these moments, small as they are, asks the same fundamental question: will discomfort be avoided or will it be faced directly? Every time discomfort gets faced rather than avoided, even in something as small as resisting an unnecessary snack, a small deposit gets made into a reserve of mental strength that grows larger over time, available later when it truly matters. The second principle involves changing the internal conversation that happens during moments of difficulty. Most people, when facing something hard, immediately start telling themselves a story about how unbearable the situation is, how unfair it feels, how much they simply cannot handle it. This internal narrative makes the difficulty feel far larger than it actually is, because the mind starts reacting not just to the situation itself, but to the frightening story being told about the situation. A warrior training the mind learns to notice this narrative forming and interrupts it deliberately. Instead of "this is unbearable," the internal voice shifts toward "this is difficult, and I can handle difficult." Instead of "I cannot do this," The shift becomes, "This is hard, and I am doing it anyway." This shift in language sounds small, but it changes the entire physical and emotional experience of a hard moment. Words shape perception more than most people realize. A challenge labeled as unbearable creates panic and a desire to escape. The exact same challenge labeled as difficult but manageable creates focus and a willingness to push through. The situation has not changed at all between these two reactions. Only the internal story about the situation has changed, and that story alone can determine whether someone collapses under pressure or rises to meet it. The third principle is learning to separate pain from suffering, a distinction that changes how difficulty gets experienced at its core. Pain is simply what happens, the physical discomfort of exhaustion, the sting of criticism, the tightness of fear in the chest. Suffering is the additional layer added on top of pain through resistance, through wishing things were different, through fighting against a reality that has already happened and cannot be changed. A warrior faces pain directly because pain is often unavoidable, but a trained mind learns to reduce suffering by accepting pain quickly, without endless resistance, rather than fighting against something that fighting cannot undo. This does not mean giving up or becoming passive. It means directing energy toward what can actually be controlled in the moment, rather than wasting it on wishing the difficulty had never appeared in the first place. Physical discomfort provides one of the most direct ways to practice this distinction, which is exactly why many disciplined traditions include some form of deliberate physical hardship. A hard workout, a cold shower, an uncomfortable stretch of exercise, all of these create real, immediate discomfort in a controlled, safe environment. Facing this discomfort without immediately quitting, staying present through it, rather than mentally checking out, builds a direct, physical experience of pushing through difficulty. This experience gets stored in the body and mind together, becoming a reference point that can be recalled later during much harder, much less controlled moments. Someone who has repeatedly finished a hard workout despite wanting to stop has already proven to themselves that quitting is a choice, not a requirement, and this proof becomes available again during far more serious challenges later. The fourth principle involves preparing the mind in advance for difficulty rather than being caught completely off guard when it arrives. Ancient philosophers who studied resilience deeply used to imagine hardship before it happened, deliberately picturing loss, failure, or difficulty in advance, not to create fear, but to remove the shock that difficulty often carries when it arrives unexpectedly. A mind that has already considered the possibility of a setback, even briefly, tends to respond with far more composure than a mind that believed everything would always go smoothly and gets blindsided the moment reality proves otherwise. This does not mean living in constant worry about everything that could go wrong. It means occasionally, calmly, asking honest questions about what might be difficult ahead and considering, without panic, how that difficulty might be handled if it actually arrived. A person preparing for a hard conversation benefits from briefly imagining how the other person might react poorly, rather than assuming everything will go perfectly and being caught off guard by resistance. A person facing a risky decision benefits from briefly considering what failure would actually look like and confirming, honestly, that it could be survived. This kind of preparation removes much of fear's power, because fear thrives most in the space of the unknown, and a mind that has already faced a difficulty in imagination carries far less panic when that difficulty shows up in reality. The fifth principle is consistency over intensity, the same principle that runs through every part of building real strength. A single extreme act of courage does very little to build lasting resilience if it stands alone, unsupported by any regular practice. What actually builds a warrior's mind is small, repeated exposure to difficulty, done consistently, week after week, until discomfort itself starts to feel less threatening simply through familiarity. This is far more sustainable than dramatic, occasional acts of bravery, followed by long stretches of comfort and avoidance. A person who faces one small difficulty daily builds far more real resilience over a year than someone who occasionally attempts something dramatic and then avoids all discomfort in between. Building this kind of mind takes patience, and there will be days where the old pattern wins, where comfort gets chosen over challenge, where the easier path gets taken despite knowing better. This does not erase the progress already made. A warrior in training also has difficult days, days where the body feels weak and the will feels thin. What separates real growth from stagnation is not the complete absence of these difficult days. It is the willingness to return to training the very next day, without excessive self-criticism, without giving up entirely because of a single lapse. Over time, something noticeable begins to shift. Situations that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. Conversations once avoided out of fear start to feel approachable. Setbacks that once triggered panic start to trigger calm, methodical problem-solving instead. This shift does not happen because life became easier or because challenges stopped appearing. It happens because the mind facing those challenges has been trained, deliberately, through countless small moments of choosing difficulty over comfort, until real strength became simply how that mind operates by default. This is the quiet transformation available to anyone willing to begin, not through some dramatic single act of bravery, but through daily, unglamorous practice, one small chosen difficulty at a time, repeated consistently until the mind that once flinched at every hardship becomes the same mind that can stand steady, clear, and unshaken when it truly matters most. Chapter 6. Simplify your life by removing what no longer serves you. A room filled with too many objects makes it hard to find anything of real value, even when that value is sitting right there among the clutter. A life works the same way. When it fills up with too many possessions, too many obligations, too many relationships that drain instead of nourish, too many commitments taken on out of guilt rather than desire, the things that actually matter get buried under the weight of everything that does not. This is not a metaphor about tidiness. It is a description of how a crowded life quietly steals the space needed for anything meaningful to breathe. Monks live with very little, and this choice is often misunderstood as some kind of sacrifice, as if they are giving something up in exchange for peace. The truth runs in the opposite direction. They are not giving anything up. They are removing what was never actually adding value in the first place, clearing away the noise so that what remains can finally be seen and appreciated fully. A single bowl, used with full attention, brings more satisfaction than a cupboard full of dishes barely noticed. A handful of true commitments, honored completely, brings more fulfillment than a calendar packed with obligations nobody has the energy to be fully present for. This principle applies far beyond physical belongings, though physical belongings offer the easiest place to begin practicing it. Simplification touches every layer of a life: the objects that fill a home, the commitments that fill a schedule, the relationships that fill emotional energy, even the thoughts that fill a mind throughout the day. Each of these layers can become cluttered in its own way, and each layer benefits from the same basic question, asked honestly and without excuse. Does this still serve a real purpose, or is it simply here out of habit, fear, or obligation? Physical clutter is the most visible layer and the easiest to start with because progress can be seen and felt immediately. A closet full of clothes that no longer fit, that never get worn, that were bought on impulse and forgotten within a week, does not just take up physical space. It creates a small, constant decision every time that closet gets opened, a tiny mental cost paid repeatedly, day after day, for years, simply because nobody took the time to remove what stopped serving any purpose long ago. The same applies to drawers full of unused items, shelves full of unread books, kept out of guilt rather than genuine intention to read them, closets full of tools and equipment purchased for hobbies long abandoned. Clearing physical clutter does not require doing everything at once. A single drawer, cleared honestly, teaches the underlying skill needed for everything larger. Pick up each item and ask a direct question. Has this been used in the past year? Does this bring real value or genuine joy when it gets used? Would replacing this later, if it turned out to actually be needed, cause any real hardship? Most items, when questioned honestly this way, reveal themselves as things being kept purely out of habit or vague guilt, rather than any real ongoing usefulness. Removing them creates immediate, tangible relief, a small but real sense of lightness that comes from finally letting go of something that stopped mattering long ago. Beyond physical objects, commitments deserve the same honest examination. Many people fill their schedules with obligations they never actually chose deliberately. A recurring meeting attended purely out of habit long after its usefulness ended. A volunteer role taken on years ago that now feels like a burden rather than a contribution. A regular social event attended out of obligation rather than genuine desire to be there. Each of these commitments quietly consumes time and energy that could otherwise go toward things that actually matter, yet they persist simply because nobody ever stopped to ask whether they still deserved a place on the calendar. Simplifying a schedule starts with the same honest questioning used for physical belongings. Looking at each regular commitment and asking directly whether it still serves a genuine purpose, whether it energizes or drains, whether it aligns with what actually matters now rather than what mattered years ago when it was first taken on. Some commitments will clearly deserve to stay, bringing real value even after honest examination. Others will reveal themselves as dead weight, kept alive only through inertia and the discomfort of having an honest conversation about stepping away. This honest conversation is often the hardest part of simplifying commitments, harder by far than clearing out a closet. Stepping back from an obligation frequently means disappointing someone, having an uncomfortable conversation, facing guilt about not continuing something that others expect to continue. This discomfort is real, and pretending it does not exist would be dishonest. But it helps to remember that saying yes to something that no longer serves a purpose is, in a very real sense, saying no to something else that might matter far more. Whether that something else is rest, deeper relationships, or meaningful work that keeps getting crowded out by lower value obligations, filling every available hour. Relationships deserve this same honest examination, though this layer requires the most care and the most compassion, both toward others and toward oneself. Not every difficult relationship needs to be cut away entirely. Family relationships, in particular, often carry complexity that simple removal cannot resolve. But even here, honest reflection matters. Which relationships leave a sense of being drained after every interaction, and which leave a sense of being genuinely nourished? Which connections exist purely out of old habit or social obligation, rarely, if ever, bringing real warmth or support? Which relationships would actually be missed if they quietly faded, and which are being maintained mostly out of guilt about the idea of letting them go? This examination is not about becoming cold or cutting people off carelessly. It is about becoming honest regarding where emotional energy actually goes, and beginning to direct more of that limited energy toward relationships that genuinely deserve it. A life with fewer, deeper relationships tends to bring far more real satisfaction than a life spread thin across dozens of shallow connections, maintained mostly through obligation and habit rather than genuine mutual care. The final layer, and perhaps the most difficult to simplify, is mental. This means the beliefs, worries, and stories carried around daily that no longer serve any real purpose, if they ever truly did. An old belief about not being good enough, formed years ago from a single painful experience, may still be quietly running in the background, shaping decisions and self-talk, without ever being consciously examined or questioned. A worry about something that happened long ago, replayed obsessively, despite having no remaining power to change, continues consuming mental energy that could otherwise support something useful in the present moment. Simplifying this mental layer starts with noticing which thoughts get repeated most often throughout a typical day, and asking honestly whether they still serve any real purpose. Does this recurring worry lead to any productive action, or does it simply loop endlessly without ever resolving into anything useful? Does this old belief about personal limitation reflect current reality, or is it simply an outdated story, formed long ago under very different circumstances, that has never been questioned or updated since? Letting go of mental clutter does not happen through simple willpower alone. It happens through consistent, gentle noticing, the same noticing practiced during quiet moments of stillness, applied specifically to these repeating, outdated patterns until their grip begins to loosen naturally over time. Simplification across every one of these layers, physical, scheduled, relational, and mental, follows the same underlying pattern. Something gets examined honestly. A clear question gets asked about whether it still serves genuine value. And based on that honest answer, a decision gets made, either to keep it fully and with genuine appreciation, or to release it, even when releasing it feels uncomfortable or uncertain in the moment. This process rarely happens all at once, and attempting to simplify everything immediately usually leads to overwhelm rather than lasting change. It happens gradually, one drawer, one commitment, one honest conversation, one repeated thought pattern at a time, examined and addressed with patience rather than urgency. Some days will bring clear, satisfying progress. Other days will bring resistance, moments where letting go of something feels harder than expected, even when that something has clearly stopped serving any real purpose. What makes this ongoing effort worthwhile is the space it gradually creates, space that was always needed but never available while everything stayed cluttered and crowded. A simplified home makes it easier to find real calm within it. A simplified schedule makes it possible to be fully present in the commitments that remain, rather than rushing exhausted from one obligation to the next. Simplified relationships allow real depth to grow in the connections that matter most, no longer diluted across dozens of shallow ones. A simplified mind creates room for clear, thin, undistracted by outdated fears and beliefs that have quietly worn out their welcome long ago. None of this requires becoming someone who owns nothing, commits to nothing, or connects with almost no one. It requires becoming someone who chooses deliberately, keeping only what genuinely earns its place, and releasing everything else with honesty rather than guilt. This is the real meaning behind a simplified life, not emptiness for its own sake, but space, deliberately created and carefully protected, so that what remains can finally be lived fully, appreciated completely, and given the full attention it has always deserved. Chapter 7. Strengthen your resilience through small, consistent, daily disciplined actions. A tree that survives a violent storm was never built by that single storm. Its roots grew deep over years of ordinary days, quiet weather, nothing dramatic happening at all, just steady growth beneath the surface where nobody was watching. When the storm finally arrived, the tree did not suddenly become strong in that moment. It simply revealed the strength that had been building underground the entire time, one ordinary day after another, long before any wind ever tested it. Resilience works the same way. It is not something that appears suddenly when hardship strikes, granted to some people and withheld from others by chance. It is grown, slowly, through small actions repeated so consistently that they eventually become the foundation a person stands on when real difficulty arrives. Nobody watches this growth happening. It looks like nothing special from the outside, just an ordinary day, followed by another ordinary day, followed by another. But underneath, something is being built, quietly, one disciplined choice at a time. Most people misunderstand where resilience actually comes from. They imagine it as something that gets summoned in a crisis, a switch that flips when things get hard enough. But a person who has never practiced discipline in small, ordinary moments cannot suddenly access deep strength the moment a real crisis appears. The crisis does not build the strength. It only reveals whatever strength was already there, built earlier, during all those unremarkable days when nobody was testing anything, and it would have been easy to skip the effort entirely. This is why monks place such enormous value on small daily disciplines, the same modest bow performed every morning, the same simple meal eaten with attention, the same short period of sitting practiced without fail. None of these actions look impressive individually. None of them would make for an inspiring story on their own, but their power comes from repetition, from doing them again and again, day after day, until they stop being something that requires effort and become simply who a person is. This is the real secret behind resilience that outlasts hardship. It was never built during the hardship itself. It was built long before, in the quiet accumulation of small, disciplined days. The first understanding needed to strengthen resilience this way is recognizing that consistency matters far more than intensity. A single, dramatic act of discipline, an extreme fast, an exhausting workout, an all-night effort to finish something important feels impressive in the moment, but does very little to build lasting strength if it stands alone, unsupported by any regular practice around it. What actually builds deep resilience is much smaller and much less exciting. 5 minutes of quiet reflection every morning. A short walk taken daily regardless of mood or weather. One task finished completely before allowing any rest, done consistently rather than occasionally. These small actions, repeated without fail across weeks and months, build far more lasting strength than any single impressive burst of effort ever could. This matters because most people approach self-improvement backward. They attempt something dramatic, feel inspired for a few days, and then burn out entirely, having built nothing lasting because the effort was never sustainable in the first place. A far more effective approach starts small enough that skipping it feels almost harder than doing it. A single push-up, a single page of reading, a single minute of sitting quietly. These actions feel almost too small to matter, and that feeling is exactly the point. Small enough to never be skipped, consistent enough to compound significantly over time, is far more powerful than large enough to feel impressive, but too demanding to sustain past the first difficult week. The second understanding needed is that discipline must be practiced specifically during moments when motivation is absent, not just during moments when it feels easy or exciting. Anyone can complete a small daily action on a day filled with energy and enthusiasm. The real building of resilience happens on the difficult days, the tired days, the days filled with legitimate excuses to skip the practice entirely. A monk who sits in quiet reflection only on days when it feels pleasant has not actually built real discipline at all. Real discipline gets proven precisely on the days it feels hardest to maintain, the days when skipping would be easy to justify and nobody would ever know the difference. This means the goal is not eliminating difficult days entirely, an impossible standard that sets anyone up for eventual failure and discouragement. The goal is showing up anyway, even in a smaller, reduced form if necessary, rather than skipping completely. A full 20-minute practice, reduced to 5 minutes on an exhausted day, still counts as showing up. It still maintains the thread of consistency that resilience depends on. What breaks the thread entirely is not a reduced effort. It is complete abandonment, skipping the practice altogether, and telling oneself it will simply resume tomorrow, a promise that grows easier to break with every day it gets postponed. The third understanding involves tracking these small actions honestly, not through complicated systems, but through simple, visible acknowledgement that builds a sense of accumulated progress over time. A simple mark on a calendar for each day a practice gets completed creates a visual record that becomes surprisingly motivating over time. Nobody wants to break a chain of consistent marks that has been building for weeks. This visual record serves as a quiet reminder during moments of temptation to skip of exactly how much has already been built and how much would be lost by breaking the pattern now over a single moment of low motivation. This tracking also provides something valuable beyond simple motivation. It offers honest evidence, during difficult moments of self-doubt, that discipline has actually been practiced consistently, even when it does not feel that way in the moment. During hard times, memory becomes unreliable, and it becomes easy to believe that no real effort has been made, that no real strength has been built. A simple record of consistent small actions, kept honestly over time, becomes concrete proof against this discouraging inner narrative, a reminder that real work has genuinely been done, day after day, even during stretches that felt uneventful or unremarkable while they were happening. The fourth understanding is recognizing that resilience built through small daily discipline transfers into areas of life far beyond the specific practice itself. A person who consistently maintains a small daily habit of physical movement, even something modest, builds more than physical benefit alone. They build proof to themselves that they can commit to something difficult and follow through despite resistance. This proof becomes available later, quietly, during completely unrelated challenges, a difficult conversation, an unexpected setback at work, a personal loss that demands real strength to move through. The specific daily practice matters less than the underlying skill it builds, the demonstrated ability to keep showing up despite discomfort, despite low motivation, despite every reasonable excuse available to quit. This is why the specific choice of daily discipline matters less than the discipline itself. A short daily walk, a few minutes of quiet reflection, a single page of meaningful reading, a brief period of physical exercise, any of these can serve as the foundation, as long as it gets practiced consistently rather than sporadically. The goal is not achieving some external mark of impressive achievement through the practice itself. The goal is proving, repeatedly, to oneself that showing up despite resistance is possible, until that proof becomes deeply embedded as a core belief about personal capability rather than remaining a fragile hope that gets tested and often disproven with every difficult day. Building resilience this way requires patience that runs counter to how most people want change to happen. There is no dramatic transformation after a single week of consistent small actions. The real shift happens slowly, almost invisibly, over months, sometimes longer, the same way a tree's roots grow slowly beneath the surface, where nobody can see the progress happening in real time. This slow pace often creates doubt along the way, moments where it feels like nothing is really changing, despite consistent daily effort. This doubt is completely normal and does not indicate failure. Growth that matters most is rarely visible while it is actually happening. It becomes visible later, revealed clearly the moment real difficulty finally arrives and the accumulated strength gets tested for the first time. There will be days, inevitably, where the small daily practice gets missed entirely, despite every good intention. This does not erase months of previous consistency, and treating a single missed day as total failure only creates unnecessary discouragement that makes giving up entirely far more likely. A missed day is simply a missed day. The practice for the following day remains exactly as available and exactly as valuable as it always was, waiting to be picked back up without excessive guilt or self-punishment over the temporary lapse. What eventually emerges from this patient, consistent practice is a kind of quiet, unshakable confidence that differs completely from confidence built through occasional dramatic achievement. This confidence does not depend on external validation or impressive results witnessed by others. It rests entirely on private, personal evidence, built day after day, that discipline is genuinely possible, that discomfort can be faced and moved through repeatedly, that showing up matters more than feeling inspired to show up. This quiet confidence becomes the real foundation underneath resilience, the deep root system that holds steady long after the storm arrives, built patiently, silently, through nothing more dramatic than small, consistent, disciplined days, chosen again and again, long before anyone ever needed to prove how strong those roots had truly grown. Chapter 8. Master your emotions before they master your important decisions. An angry email sent at midnight often reads completely differently the next morning. The words that felt necessary, even justified, in the heat of the moment, suddenly look harsh, exaggerated, sometimes embarrassing once the emotional wave that produced them has passed. Nothing about the actual situation changed overnight, only the emotional state of the person writing it changed, and that single difference was enough to produce two entirely different responses to the exact same circumstance. This is the danger hiding inside every strong emotion. It does not just color how a situation feels. It actively shapes the decisions made while that feeling is present, often in ways that look completely unreasonable once the feeling has faded. Emotions themselves are not the problem. Anger, fear, sadness, excitement, all of these serve real purposes and carry real information worth paying attention to. The problem appears when emotion takes over the decision-making process entirely, pushing logic and long-term thinking aside so completely that choices get made from the emotion itself rather than from a clear, considered assessment of the actual situation. A person consumed by anger is not thinking clearly about consequences. A person overwhelmed by fear is not weighing options rationally. In these moments, the emotion is not informing the decision. It has become the decision, and this is precisely where lasting damage tends to happen, in relationships, in careers, in choices that cannot easily be undone once made. Monks are not people who feel less than everyone else. They feel deeply, often more deeply than most, because years of quiet reflection have made them far more sensitive to their own inner experience than someone who spends every waking moment distracted by outside noise. What separates them is not reduced feeling. It is the space they have deliberately built between feeling an emotion and acting on it, a gap most people never develop because they have never practiced pausing long enough to notice it exists in the first place. This gap is the entire foundation of emotional mastery, and understanding it clearly changes how emotional moments get handled going forward. Between any triggering event and the response that follows, there is always a small window, even if it lasts only a fraction of a second. In that window, a choice exists, whether to act immediately from the raw emotional charge or to pause, even briefly, allowing the initial intensity to settle before deciding what to actually do next. Most people never notice this window exists because their reactions happen so automatically, so quickly, that action and emotion feel like a single unified event rather than two separate steps that could be pulled apart. Learning to notice this gap starts with something deceptively simple, a physical pause practiced the moment strong emotion first arises. This might mean a single deep breath taken before responding to anything upsetting. It might mean deliberately waiting a set period of time, an hour, sometimes a full day, before sending a difficult message or making a significant decision while emotion still runs high. The specific length of the pause matters less than the simple act of inserting one at all, rather than moving straight from feeling to action without any space between them whatsoever. This pause works because emotional intensity almost always follows a predictable pattern, rising sharply and then naturally beginning to settle, usually within a fairly short window of time, even for very strong feelings. A decision made at the absolute peak of that intensity looks completely different from the same decision considered even 20 minutes later, once the sharpest edge has softened even slightly. This does not mean the underlying issue disappears or should be ignored. It means the decision about how to handle that issue gets made from a slightly clearer, less reactive state, one far more likely to produce a response that still feels reasonable once the emotional wave has fully passed. Beyond simply pausing, it helps enormously to name the emotion clearly and specifically the moment it arises, rather than staying lost inside it without any clear recognition of what is actually happening internally. There is a significant difference between being consumed by rage and consciously noticing, "I am feeling intense anger right now." The second version, simply naming the emotion directly, creates an immediate small distance between the person and the feeling itself. It shifts the relationship from being the anger to observing the anger, and this shift, though it sounds subtle, actually changes brain activity in ways that measurably reduce the emotion's intensity almost immediately. This naming practice takes only a few seconds and can be done silently, internally, without needing to explain anything to anyone else in the moment. When a strong feeling arises, whether anger during a disagreement, fear before a difficult decision, or anxiety while waiting on important news, the simple internal act of naming it specifically, "This is fear, this is anger, this is disappointment," creates a small but real pause between the raw feeling and whatever action might follow. This pause is often exactly enough space to prevent an impulsive reaction that would otherwise cause real damage. Another important piece of mastering emotion before it drives important decisions involves separating the emotion itself from the story being told about the emotion. Raw feeling is often simple and passes relatively quickly on its own. What extends and intensifies that feeling, sometimes for hours or days, is the mental narrative built around it, the story about what the feeling means, what it says about the future, what terrible outcome it supposedly predicts. A moment of disappointment about a single setback can quickly expand into an entire story about being a failure in general, about nothing ever working out, about this pattern continuing forever into the future. This expanded story is not the original emotion anymore. It is an interpretation, often exaggerated far beyond what the actual situation warrants, and interpretations like this can be questioned, examined, and challenged in ways that raw feeling alone cannot. When a strong emotion arises around an important decision, it helps to ask directly what story is being told alongside that feeling. Is this decision truly as urgent as the emotion makes it feel, or does urgency exist mainly inside the emotional intensity itself? Is this situation truly as catastrophic as it currently seems, or is the mind, under the influence of strong feeling, exaggerating the stakes beyond what the actual circumstances support? These questions do not dismiss or invalidate the emotion. They simply create space to examine whether the accompanying story deserves full belief, or whether it is being inflated by the intensity of the moment, rather than reflecting an accurate picture of reality. Physical state plays a much larger role in emotional reactivity than most people realize, and this deserves direct attention as well. Decisions made while exhausted, hungry, or physically depleted tend to be far more emotionally reactive than decisions made from a rested, physically stable state. This is not weakness. It is simply how the body and mind function together under strain. Recognizing this means building in a simple rule for important decisions whenever possible, avoiding major choices during moments of significant physical depletion, and instead addressing basic needs, rest, food, calm, before attempting to think clearly about anything genuinely significant. A decision that truly matters can almost always wait long enough for a full night of sleep, and the version of that decision made after real rest is very often clearer and more sound than the version made in a state of exhaustion. Regular practice with smaller emotional moments builds the capacity needed for larger ones later. This is why the quiet daily practice of sitting with discomfort, discussed earlier as a foundation for resilience, also directly strengthens emotional mastery. Every time a small irritation gets noticed and allowed to pass without immediate reaction, every time a minor disappointment gets acknowledged honestly without spiraling into exaggerated catastrophe, the same underlying skill gets reinforced, the ability to feel something fully without being completely controlled by it. This skill, practiced repeatedly in small daily moments, becomes available later during far more significant emotional challenges, a serious conflict, a major loss, an important decision carrying real consequences. It also helps to build simple, honest checkpoints before any genuinely important decision, especially one made during a period of strong emotion. A brief pause to ask directly, am I making this choice from clarity, or am I making it from an intense feeling that may look completely different once it settles? Would this same decision still feel right if considered again tomorrow, once emotional intensity has had time to soften? Has anyone trusted been consulted, someone able to offer perspective from outside the immediate emotional wave currently in motion? These simple checkpoints do not guarantee perfect decisions every single time, but they dramatically reduce the number of choices made purely from temporary emotional intensity, choices that often become deeply regretted once that intensity has fully passed. Mastering emotion does not mean suppressing it, ignoring it, or pretending it does not exist beneath a calm surface. Suppressed emotion tends to resurface later anyway, often in more damaging or unexpected ways than if it had simply been acknowledged honestly from the start. Real mastery means feeling emotion completely and honestly, while still maintaining enough internal space to choose the response deliberately, rather than being completely swept away by the feeling's initial intensity. This distinction between feeling something fully and being controlled entirely by that feeling is exactly what separates a life driven by whatever mood happens to be strongest in any given moment, from a life guided by clear values and considered choices, even during genuinely difficult emotional moments. This mastery builds slowly, the same way every other skill discussed so far builds slowly, through repeated small practice rather than sudden transformation. Each time a pause gets chosen instead of an immediate reaction, each time an emotion gets named honestly instead of blindly acted upon, each time an important decision gets postponed until a calmer, more rested state returns, another small layer of this capacity gets strengthened. Over time, these small moments compound into something significant, a mind that can feel deeply without being hijacked completely, that can experience real intensity without letting that intensity make permanent decisions on its behalf. This is not about becoming emotionless or distant. It is about becoming someone whose decisions reflect their deepest values and clearest thinking, even when powerful feelings are present, rather than someone whose important choices get quietly written by whichever emotion happened to be loudest in the moment it mattered most. Chapter 9. Create lasting habits that fix every broken area instantly. A river did not carve a canyon in a single flood. It happened through the same water, passing over the same stone, day after day, year after year, so slowly that no single moment ever looked like progress. Yet centuries later, the canyon exists, deep and undeniable, built entirely by repetition rather than force. This is worth sitting with honestly before going any further, because the title of this chapter carries a promise that deserves a direct, truthful correction before anything else gets said. Nothing fixes every broken area of a life instantly. No habit, no matter how well chosen, works that way, and any voice claiming otherwise is not offering wisdom. It is offering a shortcut that does not exist, and chasing shortcuts that do not exist is exactly what keeps so many people stuck, jumping from one quick fix to the next, never staying anywhere long enough to let real change actually take root. What habits actually offer is something quieter and, over time, far more powerful than instant repair. They offer a way to fix broken areas one small layer at a time, through consistent repetition rather than sudden transformation, until the accumulated effect eventually becomes as undeniable as a canyon carved by patient water. This is not a lesser promise than instant fixing. It is the only promise that has ever actually held true for anyone who built a genuinely different life. Understanding this clearly and releasing the fantasy of instant repair is itself the first real step toward lasting change, because a person still waiting for a single dramatic breakthrough will keep abandoning good habits the moment they fail to produce immediate, sweeping results. The habits already discussed throughout this book, single tasking, quiet reflection, a grounded morning, freedom from unnecessary distraction, facing discomfort on purpose, simplifying what no longer serves, small daily discipline, emotional mastery. None of these fixed anything instantly either. Each one works the same way water works on stone, through repetition so consistent that change eventually becomes visible, even though no single day of practice ever felt like a breakthrough on its own. This final piece is about weaving these separate practices together into a life that keeps repairing itself continuously, not through one final dramatic fix, but through an ongoing process that never actually stops, because a life, unlike a broken object, is never simply finished being repaired once and for all. The first step in creating habits that hold long-term is choosing far fewer of them than instinct usually suggests. When someone finally decides to make real change, the natural impulse is to fix everything at once: waking early, eating better, exercising daily, meditating, reading more, cutting out every bad habit simultaneously, all starting on the very same Monday. This approach almost always fails within 2 or 3 weeks, not from lack of desire, but from asking too much change to happen at once, spreading willpower so thin across so many new efforts that none of them receive enough attention to actually take root. A single new habit, given full attention and full consistency, succeeds far more often than 5 new habits attempted simultaneously and abandoned within a month. Choosing one habit at a time, mastering it until it requires little conscious effort, and only then adding the next, feels slower than tackling everything at once. It is not actually slower, it is faster, because habits built this way tend to stick permanently, while habits piled on all at once tend to collapse together, often taking the person's confidence down with them when the whole ambitious plan falls apart within the first difficult week. The second step is anchoring every new habit to something that already happens automatically each day, rather than hoping willpower alone will remember to perform it. A habit attached to an existing routine, brushing teeth, making morning coffee, arriving home from work, borrows the automatic nature of that existing routine and becomes far easier to remember and maintain. A new habit floating freely, disconnected from any existing anchor, depends entirely on memory and motivation, both of which are unreliable on difficult days. Attaching a small stretch routine to the moment coffee finishes brewing, or a few minutes of quiet reflection to the moment before checking a phone in the morning, creates a natural trigger that does most of the remembering automatically, long after conscious effort would have forgotten on its own. The third step is making the habit small enough that skipping it feels genuinely harder than doing it. This principle was touched on earlier regarding resilience, but it applies with equal force to every habit meant to last. A goal to meditate for 30 minutes daily sounds impressive, but often collapses the first time a busy morning arrives. A goal to sit quietly for 2 minutes daily almost never gets skipped, because 2 minutes fits into even the most chaotic morning without excuse. Once 2 minutes becomes automatic, extending it becomes natural and easy. Starting large and hoping consistency follows almost never works as well as starting small and letting consistency build the foundation first, with size added only after the habit no longer requires conscious willpower to maintain. The fourth step involves expecting failure honestly, rather than being surprised or discouraged by it when it inevitably arrives. Every habit, no matter how well designed, will eventually get missed: a sick day, a stretch of travel, an emergency that consumes all available attention. What determines whether a habit survives long-term is not whether it ever gets missed. It always eventually does. What determines survival is how quickly the habit gets picked back up afterward. A single missed day followed immediately by a return the next day barely dents overall consistency. A single missed day followed by 2 weeks of complete abandonment, driven by discouragement over that one lapse, ends the habit entirely. Building in this expectation ahead of time, deciding in advance that a missed day means returning tomorrow rather than quitting entirely, protects the habit from the all-or-nothing thinking that destroys more good intentions than any external obstacle ever could. The fifth step is connecting each habit to a clear, honest reason that goes deeper than surface-level appearance or comparison to anyone else. A habit adopted only because it looks impressive, or because someone else recommended it without any real personal reason behind it, rarely survives the first difficult week. A habit connected to something genuinely meaningful, wanting more patience for the people who matter most, wanting to trust personal follow-through again after years of broken promises to oneself, wanting real energy to actually enjoy life rather than simply survive it, carries far more staying power. When a habit starts feeling difficult to maintain, and every habit eventually does, this deeper reason becomes the thing that pulls a person back to it, far more reliably than any surface-level goal ever could on its own. Once individual habits become stable through these steps, the real transformation begins to happen, not through any single habit working alone, but through several small, stable habits working together, quietly supporting each other across different areas of life simultaneously. A grounded morning makes emotional mastery easier throughout the rest of the day because a calm starting point leaves more patience available when difficult moments arrive later. Freedom from unnecessary distraction makes daily discipline easier to maintain because attention is not being constantly pulled away toward things that do not matter. Simplifying physical and mental clutter makes quiet reflection easier to access, because there is less noise competing for space in an already crowded mind. None of these habits exist in isolation. They form a connected system, each one making the others slightly easier to sustain, and this compounding effect across multiple areas is where real, lasting repair actually happens, layer by layer, area by area, far more thoroughly than any single instant fix ever could reach. This is also where patience becomes absolutely essential, because the compounding effect described here takes real time to become visible, often months, sometimes longer, before the full impact across every area of life becomes clearly noticeable. During the early months, progress can feel painfully slow, almost invisible, the same way water wearing down stone looks like nothing is happening if watched for only a single afternoon. This is precisely the period where most people give up, mistaking slow, invisible progress for no progress at all, abandoning habits right before they were about to reach the point where their combined effect finally becomes undeniable. Staying consistent through this quiet, unglamorous middle stretch, when nothing dramatic seems to be happening, is often the single most important factor separating a person who eventually experiences real, lasting transformation from a person who keeps starting over from zero every few months, forever chasing the next promising fresh start instead of finishing the one already in progress. It also helps enormously to periodically review which habits are actually still serving real value, applying the same honest simplification discussed earlier to the habits themselves. A habit that once mattered deeply can sometimes outlive its usefulness, becoming rote and hollow rather than genuinely meaningful, continued purely out of momentum rather than real purpose. Checking in honestly every few months, asking whether each current habit still connects to something real, or whether it has quietly become empty routine, keeps the entire system alive and genuinely meaningful, rather than allowing it to calcify into mindless repetition, performed only because it has always been done that way. There is no single moment where a broken area of life becomes suddenly, permanently fixed once and for all. There is only the ongoing practice, repeated daily, of showing up for the habits that support real repair, one small, consistent action at a time, across weeks that turn into months, and months that eventually turn into years. This ongoing practice never fully ends, not because the work never improves anything, but because a life, unlike a broken object sitting still on a shelf, keeps moving, keeps changing, keeps presenting new areas that benefit from continued attention and continued care. This is, in the end, a far better promise than instant repair ever could be. Instant fixes, even if they somehow existed, would leave a person exactly as fragile as before, since nothing real would have actually been built in the process, only patched over quickly, likely to crack again under the very next real pressure that came along. What gets built through small, consistent habits, repeated patiently over real time, is something entirely different, a genuine foundation, strong enough to hold steady under real pressure, precisely because it was never rushed, never faked, never built from a single dramatic moment, but earned instead, one honest, ordinary day at a time, until the person looking back after enough of those days have passed barely recognizes how far they have actually traveled from where they first began. Chapter 10. Commit fully to a lifetime of focused personal growth. An old monk, asked late in his life whether he had finally arrived at mastery after decades of practice, gave an answer that surprised the young student who had asked the question. He said no. He said he was still practicing the same sitting he had practiced 50 years earlier, still noticing the same wandering mind, still returning his attention the same way he had on his very first day. The student, expecting some story of ultimate achievement, some final state where the work was finished and mastery was complete, felt confused by this answer. But the old monk was not describing failure. He was describing the actual nature of this kind of growth, honestly, without exaggeration. There is no final arrival. There is only the practice, continued for a lifetime, and the depth that continued practice slowly creates. This is the truth this entire journey has been building toward, and it deserves to be stated plainly rather than softened. Everything covered so far, quiet reflection, a grounded morning, freedom from distraction, facing discomfort willingly, simplifying what no longer serves, small daily discipline, mastering emotion, building lasting habits. None of these are steps toward some finish line where growth stops and a permanently improved life simply begins on its own from that point forward. They are not stages in a journey that ends. They are practices meant to continue for as long as a person is alive, adjusted and deepened over time, but never actually completed in the way a task on a checklist gets completed. This might sound discouraging at first, as if it means the effort never pays off, as if the work simply continues forever without any real reward for all that consistency. The opposite is true. A life built on continued practice, rather than a single finished transformation, becomes something far richer than a life that simply reaches some static improved state and then stays there unchanged. A person who commits to lifelong growth keeps discovering new layers within themselves, keeps facing new challenges that call for new depths of the same skills already practiced, keeps finding that the same simple disciplines, sitting quietly, facing discomfort, simplifying what has grown cluttered again, continue revealing new value even decades into practicing them. Growth that never ends is not a burden. It is what keeps a life from ever becoming stagnant, from ever settling into the kind of quiet boredom that comes from believing there is nothing left to learn about oneself. Committing to this kind of lifetime practice requires releasing a belief that quietly damages far more people than most realize. The belief that real change should feel dramatic and permanent once it finally happens. This belief sets up an impossible standard, one where any return of an old pattern, any difficult week, any moment of losing patience after months of careful emotional practice feels like proof that all the previous work somehow failed or never really mattered. This is simply not how growth actually works for anyone. Not for monks who have practiced stillness for 50 years, not for anyone who has ever built real, lasting change in any area of life. Old patterns return sometimes, even after significant progress. This return does not erase the progress already made. It simply means the practice continues, applied again to whatever has resurfaced, the same way it was applied the very first time that pattern appeared. Understanding this changes how setbacks get experienced going forward. A difficult day, a lapse into old distraction, a moment of emotional reactivity that would have been handled better months ago. None of these mean starting completely over from nothing. They mean the practice gets applied once more, right where it is needed, with the same patience that built the original progress in the first place. A person committed to lifelong growth does not expect perfection. They expect continued practice, return after return, for as long as they are alive, understanding that this ongoing return is not a sign of failure, but is, in fact, the entire practice itself, exactly as it has always been. This lifetime commitment also requires redefining what success actually means within this kind of growth. Success is not reaching some final state where difficulty no longer appears, where distraction never pulls at attention again, where emotion never threatens to overwhelm clear thinking. That state does not exist for anyone, regardless of how many years of practice they have behind them. Real success looks different. It looks like noticing distraction more quickly than before and returning to focus sooner than last year. It looks like feeling strong emotion just as intensely as ever, but pausing before reacting slightly more reliably than a decade earlier. It looks like facing a new, harder challenge with the same discomfort anyone would feel, but meeting that discomfort with more steadiness than would have been possible before all this practice began. Growth measured this way, through gradual, ongoing refinement rather than final arrival, offers something to notice and appreciate at every stage, rather than only at some distant finish line that never actually arrives. Building a lifetime commitment to this kind of growth also means accepting that the specific practices themselves may need to change over time, even while the underlying commitment stays constant. What serves someone well in their 20s may need adjustment in their 40s. A practice that felt challenging and meaningful 5 years ago may now feel automatic, calling for a deeper version of the same underlying skill rather than continued repetition of the exact same beginner-level exercise. This flexibility is not abandoning the commitment. It is honoring it fully, allowing the practice to evolve alongside the person practicing it, rather than rigidly clinging to the exact same routine indefinitely simply because it worked once, long after it may have stopped offering the same value it once did. There is also a quieter, deeper reason this lifelong approach matters so much, one that goes beyond personal benefit alone. A person who commits to continued growth, year after year, becomes something valuable to the people around them, not through lectures or advice given from some position of having finally figured everything out, but simply through example, through the quiet, consistent demonstration that real change is genuinely possible, that a person can keep becoming steadier, calmer, and more intentional across an entire lifetime, rather than staying fixed in whatever patterns happen to form early on and never questioning them again. Children raised around this kind of ongoing example absorb something valuable without ever being directly taught it. Friends and family members going through their own difficult seasons often find real encouragement, not from perfect advice, but from watching someone nearby who keeps showing up for their own growth, imperfectly, honestly, consistently, decade after decade. This is ultimately what committing fully to this journey actually means, not achieving some final, polished version of oneself that never struggles again, never faces temptation again, never loses patience again. It means choosing, deliberately, again and again, for as long as life continues, to keep practicing the same fundamental disciplines that have been described throughout this book. adjusted as needed, deepened as time allows, returned to honestly after every inevitable lapse, because these disciplines are not a temporary project with a completion date. They are simply how a thoughtful, intentional life gets lived, one ordinary day after another, for as long as there are days left to live it. The old monk was not describing a failure to achieve mastery when he said his practice looked the same after 50 years as it did on his very first day. He was describing what mastery actually looks like, stripped of every unrealistic fantasy about arrival and permanence. Mastery is not a destination reached once and then held onto forever without further effort. It is the willingness to keep returning to the practice, sitting after sitting, day after day, decade after decade, with the same humility and the same commitment that existed at the very beginning, never assuming the work is finished, never believing there is nothing left to notice or refine, simply continuing, patiently, honestly, for as long as there is breath left to continue with. This is the invitation this entire book has been extending from its very first page. Not a promise that life gets permanently fixed after 10 chapters of reading or listening, not a guarantee that difficulty disappears once these principles are understood and applied for a while. Simply an invitation to begin, today, with whatever small practice feels most needed right now, and to keep returning to that practice tomorrow and the day after and every day that follows, for as long as it takes, because that is genuinely how long it takes, a lifetime, lived one grounded, intentional day at a time, each one building quietly on everything that came before it, until looking back, after enough of those days have passed, reveals a life transformed, not through any single dramatic moment, but through the simple, patient, unglamorous act of showing up, again and again, for exactly as long as there was ever a self-worth continuing to grow.